From Bobby Green being sure that Nate Diaz would come out victorious to Ben Askren being a little confident in the problem child's abilities, the MMA world has been talking about the Paul vs. Diaz fight non-stop. That said, let's find out how pros think it might pan out, starting with none other than Anderson Silva. Silva has faced Jake in the past, and Jake did incredibly well against him. So if anyone knows what Jake can do in a fight, it has to be him. In an interview with Fight Hub TV, he was asked what he thought of the upcoming Diaz vs. Paul fight and who he thought was going to walk away as the winner. And the fighter said that he knows that Jake is training hard for the fight and that people really need to respect all the effort the YouTuber turned boxer is putting into his new career. He said that Jake has been very professional and insanely focused on this one fight, and he's doing everything he can to make sure he wins. When asked if he thought Jake was going to win, the fighter said that it was hard to tell at the moment because both Diaz and Paul are incredible fighters. However, he did acknowledge that Diaz has more experience as compared to Paul, and that gives him an advantage. What's more, he shared that since Diaz also has good boxing and good cardio, it might really help his chances of winning. To add to that, while he mentioned how he respects both fighters, that doesn't mean that he thinks Jake could easily win the fight. In fact, he had a lot more to add. For instance, Silva made sure to stay politically correct and not make any statements that come back to bite him after the fight was over. He talked about how good both fighters were, and after he talked about Diaz having more experience and good cardio, he talked about Jake too. Silva said he has a very good coach who's helping him prepare for the fight, and he's a very smart fighter. The fighter added that this fight was not about power, so it doesn't matter who among the two fighters is more powerful among the two. What matters is whose timing is better, and both of these fighters have amazing timing. He said that although Diaz has more experience than Jake, Jake also has some pretty decent experience in the sport, and he's learning every day. But that being said, Nate is a beast, the fighter added.
His power was, he felt like anybody I sparred with. I trained with this guy before, Lance Palmer. He hit me harder than that. And Joe Tough, my man.
Anderson said that when any fighter decides to step into the octagon against Diaz, he needs to prepare for war. He added that Diaz is his favorite. Well, he never really said who he thought would win and mostly stayed PC. But this next fighter made sure to let everyone know who he thought was going to walk away victorious. It's our very own Bobby Green. The UFC veteran told everyone who he was rooting for in the upcoming fight between Diaz and Paul. He said that if we look back at Nate's career in fighting and focus on the fights he's fought in the UFC, we'll see that sometimes he gets dropped. He said that he also noticed that Diaz's style of fighting isn't really meant for MMA, and it's pretty obvious sometimes. The veteran added that Diaz has more of a boxing style of fighting, and that his fighting style would work much better for him in boxing than in MMA. He can roll shots and take shots differently, he said. Now, this makes it sound like he's rooting for Jake, right? Well, not exactly. He said that although the fight has 8 rounds, he can guarantee everyone that Jake won't be able to make it through to the end of the 8th round. The pro said that if Diaz gives it a push and starts pushing that gas pedal, he could knock out Jake Paul in the 5th or 6th round. Although Green thinks Jake is no match for Diaz, this next fighter would disagree. I'm referring to Darren Till. Darren Till is a big name in the UFC, so when he says something, people take it with more than just a grain of salt. When he was asked about the upcoming fight, he made sure to let us know who he thought was going to win. Till said that he was obviously a huge fan of Nate Diaz, adding that Diaz has always been an incredible fighter and that he's one of the toughest in the game. Then Dill talked about his upcoming fight, saying that he's not really fond of Diaz's fight with Paul. But you might be wondering why, just like the interviewer did, so Till explained his reason behind it. He said that if we want his honest opinion, it would be that he thinks Jake would be able to beat him in the fight. The fighter added that he didn't think Jake could beat Diaz in MMA because that's Diaz's thing, and he's much better than Paul added.
Yeah, I'm an athlete, a warrior. We should always be ready to fight everybody on our worst day. And I want to give a shout out to my brother Nick Diaz, the man, the main man. They're the new king of this. now, and it's right here, all right?
But the reason he thinks Paul could beat Diaz in this fight is simple, because Jake is much bigger than Diaz. He added that Nate competes at 155 pounds and came up to 170, but Jake has been in 185 for a while, so a fight at 185 pounds is just too much for Diaz in his opinion. Although a lot of people agree with him when he said that Diaz might lose, this next fighter pointed out how Jake didn't stand a chance against Nate. It's Paul Redmond. Redmond went on Twitter and talked about how Tommy Fury absolutely destroyed Jake Paul in their fight last year, and comparing him to Nate, his new opponent, he said that Nate has been destroying real boxers for the last 15 years. The pro then talked about how strong Nate actually is, saying he has a granite chin and how he could do cardio for days on end. So he implied that there is no comparison between Nate Diaz and Jake Paul. One is an actual fierce boxer, and the other is just a YouTuber who came into the game and lost to a boxer who wasn't even that strong.
Irritating. I train for Hamza. I don't even know how to fight this guy. I'm gonna watch the video tonight, but it don't matter anyway because I train for everybody always anyway. I don't train for fights anymore. I just train to fight everybody always, ready for wars.
Shots fired. He then said he didn't really understand why people were rooting for Jake Paul. Shady Paul, I see you. He said he just didn't see how people thought this was going to be easy for Jake. Am I missing something? He said at the end of his tweet. Well, unlike Redmond, this next fighter thinks it's going to be a bitter loss for Nate. I'm talking about Ben Askren. Apparently, Ben Askren is pretty confident about how this upcoming fight is going to go. He's been talking about it like a lot of other pros ever since the news of the fight was announced. The fight is going to take place on the 5th of August 2023, and even though a lot of fighters believe it might be too early to make any strong predictions, Ben Askren is not one of them. He took to Twitter as soon as the news of the fight was announced and predicted the winner of the match, expressing his confidence in the YouTuber turned boxer. He said that fans of Nate Diaz were going to be pretty sore when he got beaten by Paul. He said that they're gonna cry so hard when that happens. It'd be so funny if Nate actually won the fight and commented on this tweet. Now that's something I'm looking forward to, but I'm not the only one looking forward to the trash talking that the two fighters would do. This next fighter is in the same boat. It's none other than Terrence McKinney. While a lot of fighters were either really excited and busy making their predictions or not excited about the fight at all, some just didn't care about it. Some fighters were interested in who wins, but some fighters like Terrence McKinney were more interested in what would happen once the interviews and press conferences for the fight start. As the UFC announced the news of the fight on Twitter, the fighter tweeted about his thoughts about it. He said that he couldn't wait for the press conferences and the trash talking the two fighters would do, which, by the way, has already started on Twitter, with Jake posting a gravestone with Diaz's name on it. But honestly, trash talking is one of those things that just adds flavor to these fights. Won't you agree? And that was all about pros predicting Jake Paul versus Nate Diaz.